Toronto protesters are fighting the city in court today, and they're hoping to be allowed to keep their encampment at St. James Park. Now they have a new ally. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association has been given permission to intervene on behalf of the protesters. They're hoping to get eviction notices thrown out on the grounds they violate constitutional rights. So joining us now is Cara Zwibel. She's director of the Fundamental Freedom Program with the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. And you were at today's hearing.
I was there this morning. Yep.
Okay, so how did it go?
So the portion of the hearing that I was there for was the lawyer for the protesters, and I think that the court was asking a lot of good questions, was sort of grappling with the issues, the important issues here. What is protected expression, and what are reasonable limits on that expression?
What brought the civil liberties to this stage where you're actually now intervening on behalf of the protesters?
So we decided to intervene. We frequently intervene in cases where constitutional rights are at issue because we want to assist the court in thinking about the kind of analysis that they should use in judging constitutional cases where constitutional rights are at issue. In this case also because everything happened so quickly and because many of these protest groups have trouble finding legal counsel. Their legal counsel have to act usually pro bono, so for free. We thought we could assist the court with some of the legal arguments around the constitutional issues.
So, but it's not correct to say that you're defending the Occupy Toronto protesters.
No, we, as an intervener, we're what's called a friend of the court. So we're trying to assist the court in coming to a decision. I'd say our arguments are definitely supportive of the constitutional rights that the protesters are trying to assert here. But we don't, for example, put in any evidence. We don't really take a position on the evidence. We leave that to the parties to the dispute to do.
So what do you think are the rights that are being trampled over?
Well, freedom of expression, freedom of peaceful assembly, those are the rights that we think are at issue here. Obviously, freedom of association. I know the protesters also talk about their freedom of conscience, that they're sort of manifesting their sincerely held beliefs, and that's what the protest is a manifestation of. So those are the constitutional rights that are at issue here and that are protected by our Constitution. And then the question is, can the government limit those rights, and what kind of limits placed on those rights are reasonable or not reasonable?
Can there be a middle ground? Because, the city's saying we've let you stay here for a month, so we need to winterize the park. Can they move to another location? Can they just be there in the daytime? A lot of things have been said within the media, at least. What do you think about all of these? Would that make everyone happy, considering that their rights won't be trampled on?
Well, I think that, one concern is when the city comes and says, it's enough. We've heard your message. It's gone on long enough. It's time to leave. That's not really how constitutional rights work.
That's a violation of their rights.
If we allowed the government to decide when we've exercised our rights enough, they wouldn't really be meaningful. But the question definitely is, are there compromises that can be reached? And I think, many of the protesters have said, if there's a concern about winterizing the park, we'd like to talk about that. We'd like to figure out a way to make that happen. I think the evidence from the city that's been put before the court is that, we don't know who to talk to. It isn't clear. There isn't a leader. But, in a democracy, sometimes governments have to talk to stakeholders. They have to figure out a way to engage in consultation. And we don't really think that's been done here. And we think that that's a precursor to any other more extreme action being taken.
Okay, so if the judge decides to evict these protesters, where does the Civil Liberties Organization stand? Do you keep fighting the fight, or do you just leave it as friend of the court?
Well, it will depend on what the court says. So, there's a number of different things that the court could do, and even if that involves asking the protesters to leave, and I think no one's suggesting that they can't protest. What the city's saying is, they have to remove their tents and they can't be there between midnight and 5:30 a.m. The question, though, is what will the court do in terms of a remedy? And it will really depend on what that remedy looks like, what the next steps will be.
All right, Cara, thanks for coming in and speaking with us.
Thank you.
That's Cara Zwibel of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, joining us here in studio in Toronto.